Welcome to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Literacy webinar series. This is session 6, Exploring AI's Impacts. My name is Greg Kulowiec. I'm the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Strategy Consultant, and I'll be leading this webinar archived recording with you today. So before we get into the content of the webinar, we want to make sure that we're clear that all of the content we've been exploring in this six-part series is aligned to the department's educational vision, which states that all students are known and valued. Learning experiences are real-world, relevant, and interactive, and individualized supports enable students to excel at grade level and beyond. Now, part 6 of this series is built off the department's AI resources. You can see we have them here on the screen. All of the webinars from this six-part series are from the AI literacy module for educators. There's two versions of that module, the openly accessible one on the middle of the screen, and then the one with the gold seal is a certified course that you complete step by step and receive a certificate of completion when you're done. Now, part 6 of this series is exploring the last key principle in this AI literacy module. Now, this module is built for K-12 educators. The purpose is to help all educators across the Commonwealth develop a foundational understanding of generative AI through a self-paced learning experience. And like we said, there's two versions. Now, completing the course independently is absolutely an option. There's links here on the screen, and those will be available in the video notes below. We are essentially taking you through this module step by step in this webinar video series. Now we're building the entire experience off of these core principles around AI literacy. This session in particular is exploring the last one here, which is AI's impacts. Our goal here is to cultivate knowledge of how AI is influencing schools and society outside of manipulating the tools effectively through skillful prompting or beyond understanding data privacy and security kind of issues to be aware of or having a framework for use. So we're thinking kind of beyond the keyboard and beyond daily use to bigger concepts. And that's how we're going to be exploring AI's impacts. Now, let's begin by cultivating knowledge of how AI is influencing schools and society. There's really three big buckets that we've identified. One is this concept around academic integrity. So it's reasonable to understand how to use the tools and how to manipulate them and prompt them effectively. But this then poses other questions around the integrity of the work that students are engaged with. Another key principle or key idea of how generative AI is impacting society is AI generated misinformation. As the tools become more sophisticated, it's increasingly challenging to delineate between original content that's crafted by an artist or even a photograph or AI generated content. So we have to recognize that as a societal impact. And then we're going to explore additional impacts beyond these two. We'll focus on one, which is environmental, but we'll look at a few additional domains as well. So, academic integrity. One of educators' key concerns about AI and generative AI in schools relates to the question of how to use AI in ways that reinforce learning, not short circuit it. Across the Commonwealth, educators are grappling with questions about how to detect AI use, if and how to integrate its use into classrooms, and how to ensure that academic integrity remains core to teaching, learning, and student assessment practices. Now, to help, and one way to approach that is a really helpful tool here, which is a sample student agreement on the use of generative AI. Now, this is one sample that you can use. This sample is downloadable, and the link will be provided in the video notes below. But this is an entry point or a model or a framework that can give students transparent language around the use of the tools, agreement, when to use the tools, when not to use the tools. So this 6-point checklist could be a helpful starting off point and a model that you could build off of. And the goal here is obviously to maintain academic integrity and really even possibly recognize, can the tools be used in a way to maintain academic integrity, and what kind of guardrails should we put around student use so we can maintain the validity and integrity of any work students are engaged with. And here's the sample around how AI can help me learn better. It's important for future use, so my goal is to use it responsibly. I'll use AI tools that won't harm others. I won't share any personal or confidential information. That's that student data privacy piece. I'll use it in ways that support my learning and really follow my school or my teacher's instructions or guidelines. So I think that's really the key one there is bullet point number three that we can think about, maybe even integrating that into your own personally designed academic integrity statement. Now, other ways to think about maintaining academic integrity can be derived from the AI assessment scale that's developed by Perkins, Furs, Rowe, and McVaugh. So, another approach might be for educators to establish expectations for AI use that are dependent on the specific task or assignment. So, maybe you've come across the AI assessment scale, and this ranging from no AI use all the way to kind of like AI exploration and lots of creative kind of co designing ways. Now, one thing that the way I interpreted this is not necessarily a tool that would be kind of displayed in a classroom. I think this is more for the educator to use as a framework to think about if I'm going to have my students use generative AI, are there reasonable use cases? We might even want to back up a step further and really examine this from what problem are my students working on? What challenge are they facing? And might generative AI help them solve that problem in a reasonable way that won't remove too much friction, won't remove too many barriers, and will allow them to maintain academic integrity while also responsibly using the tool. So if we look at AI, no AI, that kind of top level, that's when we can look at the work and go, we're determining that the work should be completed in its entirety without the assistance of generative AI at all. And this is maybe a more controlled environment setting. I immediately think of like a blue book environment. If we move to level two, AI for planning, that might be used in a brainstorming environment for outlining initial ideas or engaging in initial level research, making effective planning of a project that you might be working on. So I encourage you to maybe even pause the video here and explore these different levels on the AI scale. But like I said, I think it's critical that we start with what is the task, what is the challenge, what is the assignment? Is generative AI going to be valuable in this use case to not remove any level of academic integrity and make sure that student use can live right alongside using these technologies effectively? I think other thing to keep in mind, even when using a helpful model like the AI assessment scale, is that the language in bold at each level, you may use AI to assist for specific tasks like drafting, refining, or evaluating. This is at level three, the AI collaboration level. Students may still need the prompt or may still need to be coached on what the interaction looks like. So, saying you can use it to refine or evaluate your work, we might still have to provide the actual mechanism, the prompt, the tool, or the description of the interaction and the guidelines for the interaction to actually engage at, for example, a level three of AI collaboration. So, really helpful tools and really helpful starting off points so you don't have to start from scratch on your own. Now, three principles to keep in mind when we're attempting to maintain academic integrity. One is to foster a culture of safe disclosure. So, students will need to have supportive, open conversations with their educators about what academic integrity means in an AI enabled world. Thoughtful modeling and disclosing of educators' own use may also help create a culture of transparency and signal to students that honesty and ethical reflection is more important than simply having the right answer. Now we're really early in this kind of the arrival of this technology and the use of this technology. So we are taking this approach at the Department of Transparency. It's kind of a critical avenue to begin to engage with academic integrity. Another thing to think about is designing AI-free in-class experiences, assessments, or activities. So one of the most effective ways to uphold academic integrity in the age of AI is to bring key assignments back into the classroom. For tasks where it's important to gauge a student's independent knowledge and skills, consider using pen and paper assignments, in-class essays, oral presentations that make it significantly harder for students to rely on AI-generated responses. And this is my favorite part here is try breaking large projects into stages, incorporating reflection, asking students to apply course concepts to their own experiences, or to make assessments more meaningful and more AI resistant. The initial reaction when these tools emerged was maybe to go down this path entirely. Everything must happen in the classroom. And I think it's reasonable to go if we want to maintain that this assignment, this assessment is still valid it has to be engaged. Students have to engage with it in a controlled environment, in a technology-free environment. Completely reasonable approach. But I think it's also reasonable to identify use cases where the tools can be valuable, thinking about that AI assessment scale. So it's really blending like these principles with the AI assessment scale, with that academic integrity agreement. And I think it's putting the use of the tools out in the open, demonstrating what meaningful use looks like, but also recognizing that we have to maybe rethink the design, the location, the experience around any assessment that's happening in a classroom setting. I like to think about it this way with that breaking up. This is the Swiss cheese model that was presented. I first came across it by Philip Dawson. It will be linked in the video notes below. And he described assessment as pieces of Swiss cheese. So instead of one massive culminating assessment that generative AI might be able to plow straight through, like those three big holes in the back, if we think about the assessments as layers of Swiss cheese that we can kind of rotate, yes, generative AI might have a use case with one of the assessments or one of the tools we're measuring student understanding, but you can't go straight through to the other one. Think of maybe pairing together in class debate with Socratic seminar, with maybe a piece of artwork to express understanding, with a timed writing task, with a digital experience. So, all these different ways to check for student understanding where generative AI can't hopefully make a through line against all three of those. And the last principle here is we like to think about avoiding a reliance or an over reliance on AI detectors. So, AI detectors at this point, at the recording of this video, don't necessarily work well enough to rely on in their entirety. They can get it wrong, suggesting that something was written by AI when it wasn't, or missing something that was. As an educator, you can't fully trust their results entirely. They're also known to have bias against writers for whom English is an additional language, and quote, their use can promote a culture of policing assignments to maintain the status quo rather than preparing students for a future where AI use is ubiquitous. It's also possible that unless there's a specific agreement with your district, their use may violate student data privacy laws. Are all AI detectors bad? Should the technology be abandoned in its entirety? That's for your school or district to decide, especially when it comes to student data privacy. I think it's reasonable to say we should avoid relying on them as the sole measure of authenticity and of student work. And that's a reasonable approach to take at this point. One way to kind of argue against the use of the tools is this emerging research titled "Heads We Win, Tails You Lose: AI Detectors in Education." I think this is a helpful bit of research. We're going to link this in the video notes below if you want to dig in further to get a sense of maybe the some of the problematic tendencies of AI text detectors and maybe why it's not best to be used. Like I always like to think of as the sole measure of authenticity of student work in a classroom setting. So, the key takeaway here, educators play a key role in shaping student understanding of academic integrity in the age of AI. This includes communicating clearly about responsible use, fostering a culture where students feel safe disclosing how they use the tools, designing authentic assessments that are less susceptible to AI misuse, and steering clear of unreliable detection tools. While there is no one size fits all approach, thoughtful guidance and transparency can help students engage with these tools ethically and grow as independent thinkers. So let's take on, so academic integrity is one of those first initial concerns that we have. And now let's take on the second concern, which is misinformation. Before we do that specifically, let's clearly define these different levels from malinformation all the way to misinformation. Malinformation is factual information that is used out of context, manipulated, or released to cause harm. Could that be the case with generative AI? Absolutely. We could have factual information that's manipulated by a generative AI tool, a factual video that's manipulated, and that can potentially cause harm. We don't tend to think about generative AI output as malinformation. It tends to land in one of these two categories, whether it's disinformation or misinformation. Disinformation is false content shared deliberately to mislead or harm. This is completely fabricated content, fabricated video, fabricated audio, fabricated images that can mislead. Now, that's a very deliberate act, very problematic act. On the other side, we have misinformation. And I think this might be the category that students might fall into more often. This is false or inaccurate content shared unintentionally. And this is where part of AI literacy emerges, is that idea that, like, if we understand the tools effectively and we can be aware that digitally generated content that we might interact with in this present day might be inaccurate content. And we talked about this in a previous series about kind of like pausing when we come across this content and maybe doing some fact checking, some lateral exploring across other media or other readings to determine, is this accurate? Should I continue to share that? So we're really falling into, whether it's disinformation or misinformation, one of those two categories would be most likely in an education setting or when students may engage with this content. Now let's approach some strategies around misinformation. And we have this framework that we like to use, and this framework is explored in the AI literacy module of pause, verify, and consult. So let's work through those right now to explore these ideas. So pause. Most AI generated disinformation is intended to be provoking and create an emotional reaction. When users take a moment to question, verify, or simply choose not to engage, they help interrupt this cycle of amplification that gives disinformation its power and reach. So, coming across digital content online, generated video that might be alarming or provoking in some capacity, and before simply pushing that content forward, we pause. We consider that it may be AI generated, especially in our current landscape, and we don't allow that information to continue to perpetuate and create more disinformation. Verify. Move away from the original source you're reading and check facts, investigate claims, and verify information using other reliable sources. This skill, this literacy skill, is called lateral reading. It's especially important when working with generative AI, where information is often decontextualized, stripped from authorship, sourcing, and publication dates. So if we think way back to webinar one in this series about kind of foundational knowledge, generative AI models generate text, tokens of text, fractions of letters based on this huge data set and how their tools have been trained to generate text output. So it's not as if we can take the entirety of a text passage that's found on the internet and that is generated with the source along with it. It's generated words, seeing the connections of words and all sorts of data that's found online or in these data sets. So when information is removed from that original author, removed from its source, removed away from publication dates, and it's generated, now it's like a mash of ideas that are put together or concepts that are put together that have to be verified. So this idea of laterally taking a concept, maybe exploring it in three different independent searches separate from generative AI to see, where did this idea come from? Where does this appear in other sources? Who may be the author of this original idea to verify? So continuing, AI generated outputs usually don't allow you to assess where the information came from or how trustworthy it is. Though, as tools are evolving, more and more including citations to the original content. And this verification concept, this could even be valuable for an individual user who's engaging with generative AI. You can make high level requests of the tools. So whatever you're asking it to generate, you can say, include the original web source, include a valid link, include the name of the author. We're forcing the tools or attempting to force the tools to verify and validate anything that they're generating instead of just generate a paragraph about this idea for me that's generally challenging to validate or verify. And the last one is consulting others. So, school librarians, experts in the field that are already in schools, are essential resources in this work. They have extensive training on how to combat misinformation and disinformation, and they can work closely with educators and with students to help establish a strong foundation of information and media and digital literacy skills. Often, school librarians offer to teach or co-teach classes to help students learn and detect deep fakes and misinformation so that they do not inadvertently contribute to in the spreading of these problems. To take advantage of these experts that are likely already in your building or your district to help with this AI literacy strategy. Now, another helpful way to think about this, and these will be linked in the video notes below, is transforming the concern around misinformation into valuable learning experiences. So we have three resources here from two different authors. One is from the CRAFT framework, this student lesson plan on what is AI generated misinformation. That one's on the left. And then we have two resources on the right here of illustrating a hoax with generative AI. So that's using the tools to actually engage with creating misinformation content. And this is helping students understand how easy it is to generate this type of output. And we have this lesson plan around generating an AI misinformation campaign. Again, these will be linked below, maybe worth exploring if you're working with students and you have access to the tools and you'd like to transform not just understanding the ideas, but engaging with this misinformation concept. So, are there other things to be aware of? What other impacts should I be aware of outside of simply using the technology? We have privacy and ownership, labor disruptions, elections and civic life, and human connection. Now, in the context of this archived webinar, we're not going to explore all four of these, although they are addressed with some supporting resources in the online module. There's legitimate concerns around all four of these domains. We're just simply not going to get into all of them in this webinar. We're going to focus on one in particular, which is the environmental impact of generative AI. So this emerges regularly in discussions around using the technology. There's three tools here, and I'll go to one of them live just to do a demonstration. But I think the best we can do right now is to be as well informed as we possibly can around the environmental impact of generative AI. I think we should avoid at all costs making generalizations around the lack of environmental impact or the overly generalizing what the environmental impact is and try to be as informed as possible. Even in my own exploration of the topic, it seems like the technology is evolving so quickly and there's constantly slightly evolving nuanced concerns and discussion around the severity of the environmental impact and what's actually going on. So we do have some tools that can help us. The tool on the left here comes from the University of Maine. It's called What Uses More. And what it allows us to do is compare side by side a non-generative AI technology use or task and a generative AI technology use or task. So for example, we might compare watching an hour of streaming video to generating, 100 lines of code with a generative AI tool. And we can pick the same type of energy where it's deriving from. Maybe it's coal powered, and maybe the data centers for both of these are in a warm environment, which will require more water or more cooling efforts. And then we can compare side by side what the footprint is of streaming video versus generating code, for example. That I find to be really helpful. I really like the tool because it's transparent around where they get their research and their data from. Now, there's another resource in the middle of the page. It's a little bit more extensive. This comes from MIT and it's analysis from the MIT Technology Review that gives you a really comprehensive look on the energy impact and the energy footprint on generative AI from maybe a perspective that you haven't considered. So that'll be worth exploring as well. And then there's another app off to the right that's a kind of like AI environmental impact calculator. So you can drop in a number of different variables to see what it is. I think what we can do at this point is recognize that the tools are fairly present. We have access to these tools in many education settings. Schools have text generative AI tools that are available to students and teachers. A lot of these tools have different language models. They have fast models and then they have reasoning models. I think one approach that I'm taking when I work with educators and work with schools and talk about the technology is that the fast models use less energy. Most of the time, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, with the work that I'm doing with teachers and the use cases that we have with students, the fast models are generating a high quality output, and we don't need to use a reasoning model that is essentially engaging with itself, generating an output, and then improving the output, and then running a reasoning question, and then improving the output, and considering different approaches and improving the output. So all this is happening behind the scenes using more energy, generating more tokens or more text that we don't even necessarily see. So while it's helpful to be aware by using these tools to improve our awareness, we can also just improve our practice. I think we can also critically reflect on Instead of our behavior, our habits being, let my first step be to turn to the generative AI tool, our first step could be, can I solve this independently? Can I solve this with a team? Do we need to use generative AI? Is that going to help me solve a problem in a way that I simply couldn't if I didn't have access to the tool? So that's one way to think about the environmental impact of the technology. So at this point, we made it. We made it all the way to the end of this six-part series. You'll be able to receive a certificate of completion for watching this six-part series in its entirety. There'll be an exit survey. We're also looking for feedback. So if there's anyone who's interested in possibly reviewing our AI resources to think about building our family and community course, because that's what we're working on next, you can register to be a reviewer of our upcoming AI resources. You can always stay in touch with us via email at k12edtech@mass.gov. So thank you very much for watching this entire video series. We hope it was helpful in increasing your awareness, your foundational understanding how to leverage the tools from a human-centered viewpoint, being aware of student data privacy and all the concerns around that kind of potential impact of information being provided to the tools, and as well as bigger kind of like global systemic and environmental concerns that we explored in this webinar. So thank you very much for watching the whole series. I appreciate your time and energy, and I look forward to seeing you in future AI supported work.